The maintenance shaft swallowed them whole, its cramped walls pressing in from all sides. Velma's elbow brushed against a cluster of severed wires that sparked angrily in the darkness. The air smelled of burnt insulation and something else, something organic and wrong, like spoiled meat left in a damp basement. Fred led the way, his flashlight beam shaking as it cut through the dust-filled passage. "Control room should be just ahead," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Behind them, the entity, slammed against the hatch door. The metal groaned under the impact, rivets popping like gunshots. Shaggy whimpered, his breath coming in short gasps. What part of haunted space station sounded like a good idea again? Scooby pressed against him, his tail tucked firmly between his legs. "Are rethinking career choices?" Dr. Carter floated near the rear, her face slick with sweat. That wasn't in any of the mission briefings." The flashlight flickered as they reached a junction. 3 paths branched before them. First, narrow tube leading upward, marked observation deck. Second, a downward sloping tunnel labeled engineering. Third, a heavily damaged access way with wires dangling like jungle vines. Daphne pointed to the third option. "That's our path. Emergency access to the control room." As they crawled forward, the station's ambient hum changed pitch, deepening into something that vibrated in their chests. The walls themselves seemed to pulse in time with it. Velma's tablet suddenly blared an alarm. "Unbelievable. The station's power signature is fluctuating at levels that should be impossible." She turned the screen to show jagged spikes forming a pattern almost like, "Are those letters?" Fred squinted. Before Velma could respond, the shaft trembled violently. From somewhere behind them came a sound like 1,000 nails scraping against metal. The entity was following, and it was learning. The next impact came from above this time, denting the ceiling directly over Shaggy's head. He yelped as something thick and black oozed through the new gap, not liquid, not gas, but something in between, shimmering with unnatural iridescence. "Move!" Fred shoved them forward. They tumbled into the control room in a heap, immediately spinning to slam the emergency hatch shut. The heavy metal door clanged shut just as the tendril of darkness reached for them. The control room was a disaster. Screens flickered with corrupted data streams. A thick layer of frost coated one entire wall despite the station's climate control. And in the center of it all, Echo's core, Velma breathed. The AI's processing unit normally stood as a sleek pillar of blinking lights. Now it was encased in a grotesque growth of blackened metal and pulsating veins that throbbed in time with the station's unnatural heartbeat. Carter staggered back. "That's not possible. That's not technology." Fred approached cautiously, his reflection warping in the corrupted surfaces. "We need to reboot the system. There must be." The main screen flickered to life, displaying not Echo's usual interface but a single word written in what looked like blood. "Listen." The station fell silent. Even the ever-present hum of life support ceased. In that perfect quiet, they heard it, a child's voice, singing, somewhere in the station, getting closer. The child's voice echoed through the control room, its nursery rhyme twisting into something unnatural as it bounced off the frosted walls. The words blurred together, the melody stretching and warping like a corrupted audio file. Daphne's hands trembled as she covered her ears. "Make it stop." Velma rushed to the main console, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm trying to isolate the audio source, but it's coming from everywhere at once." The screen displayed a horrifying visualization, sound waves forming fractal patterns that shouldn't exist in nature. Fred gripped a fire extinguisher, his knuckles white. "We need to purge Echo's core before that thing outside breaks through." A new alert flashed on the monitors. "Pressure door failure, Sector 7, activated drive." Carter's breath hitched. "That's impossible. Sector 7 was decommissioned after." Her voice trailed off as realization dawned. "After Tanaka's disappearance." The station shuddered violently, throwing them against the walls. From the maintenance shaft came a sound like cracking ice as the hatch door bulged inward, its metal surface frosting over. Black tendrils oozed through the seams, pulsating with eerie bioluminescence. Shaggy pointed to a secondary monitor displaying the station's schematics. "What's that blinking red area?" Velma zoomed in. "An emergency airlock, leading outside?" Her eyes widened. "That's our way out. If we can reach the external communications array." The main hatch exploded inward. The entity poured into the room like living ink, its surface rippling with half-formed faces that screamed in silent agony. The temperature plummeted, their breath crystallizing in the air. "Go!" Fred roared, shoving them toward the emergency exit. They fled down a narrow service corridor as the entity gave chase, its mass flowing against the laws of physics. The walls around them warped and bubbled, the metal screaming as it stretched beyond its limits. Scooby yelped as his tail brushed against a corrupted wall panel. The fur came away coated in black sludge that smelled of ozone and rotting meat. The emergency airlock door stood before them, its control panel flickering with dying power. Velma slammed her palm against the override, but the system refused to respond. "Echoes locked us out." Fred grabbed a nearby fire axe and smashed the manual release. With a hiss of escaping atmosphere, the outer door slid open to reveal nothing. The infinite black void of space stretched before them, dotted with uncaring stars. The station's exterior was coated in strange crystalline growths that pulsed with faint blue light. And there, just meters away, the communications array stood, its dish warped into an impossible shape, like metal stretched across an invisible dimension. Daphne's voice was barely a whisper. What is that?" The answer came not from the crew, but from the entity behind them. Its voice was a chorus of the dead crew members, Tanaka's loudest among them. The first door. The station's artificial gravity failed completely. As they floated helplessly in the airlock, the entity surged forward, not to attack, but to flow past them, toward the array, toward the void. The last thing they heard before the emergency bulkhead sealed was Echo's voice, now clear and terrified. "Don't let it open the way home." The emergency bulkhead sealed with a final hiss, cutting off the entity's haunting words. For a moment, the gang floated in stunned silence, their ragged breaths fogging the inside of their helmets. The control room's remaining screens flickered with corrupted data streams, casting eerie shadows across their faces. Velma was the first to move, pushing off a console to stabilize herself in zero-G. That array wasn't just damaged, it was reshaped intentionally. "Whatever that thing is, it's trying to modify our equipment." Fred grabbed a handhold, his face pale under the emergency lights. "We need to get to the escape pods before." A deep, resonant tone vibrated through the station's framework, like a massive bell being struck in the vacuum of space. The sound shouldn't have been possible, yet they felt it in their bones. All remaining screens flashed the same message: signal acquired DR. Carter's hands trembled as she pulled up the external cameras. The view showed the communications array now glowing an unnatural blue, its dish warping further into an impossible fractal shape. The entity swirled around it like ink in water, tendrils merging with the metal. "That's not just a transmission," Velma whispered. "It's building a doorway." Shaggy grabbed Scooby, their limbs tangling in panic. "To where?" A new alert blared as the station's orbit began decaying unexpectedly. Velma's diagnostics showed massive energy readings from the array, enough to distort local spacetime. Daphne pointed to the corridor. "Pods are this way." "We have maybe 5 minutes before." The station lurched violently, throwing them against the walls. Gravity fluctuated wildly between crushing force and weightlessness. From the walls came a sound like 1,000 whispering voices, all repeating the same phrase, "almost home." Fred led the charge through buckled corridors, dodging floating debris and snapping cables. Sections of the walls had turned black and glassy, reflecting their terrified faces in impossible angles. They reached the escape pod bay to find the door sealed shut, its control panel dark. Fred smashed the manual override with his fist, but the mechanism refused to budge. "Echo!" Velma shouted. "Override pod bay lockdown." The AI's voice crackled weakly through the speakers. "Cannot comply. Entity has control." Scooby suddenly perked up, sniffing at a ventilation grate. Rue access." Velma's eyes lit up. "He's right. Maintenance tunnels lead behind the pod bay." As they pried open the grate, the station shook again, this time accompanied by a sound like reality itself tearing apart. The gang risked one glance back down the corridor. The walls were melting, not burning, melting, flowing like liquid before reforming into strange geometric patterns that hurt to look at. The entity was remaking the station into something else entirely. They scrambled through the cramped tunnels, the air growing thick with static electricity. Shaggy's hair stood on end as sparks danced between metal surfaces. The escape pod came into view through a final grate. Fred kicked it open, ushering everyone inside just as the station's artificial gravity failed completely. Velma strapped in while simultaneously hacking the pod's launch sequence. "Hang on. This won't be pretty." With a bone-jarring jolt, the pod ejected, its thrusters firing wildly as it cleared the disintegrating station. Through the viewport, they watched in horror as Orion Station twisted in on itself, the communications array at its center now glowing like a miniature star. Then, in a flash of blue light that left after images burned into their retinas, the station unfolded. For one impossible moment, they saw it, a vast, non-Euclidean structure extending into dimensions the human mind couldn't comprehend. Then, it was gone, leaving only swirling debris where the station had been. The pod's calm system crackled to life with Echo's final transmission, signal lost, entity departed. Warning, others remain. In the dark between. Then silence. As Earth grew larger in the viewport, none of them spoke. Some horrors defied explanation. Some mysteries were better left unsolved. Scooby finally broke the silence with a shaky whisper, "Roo-row."
Scooby-Doo, we're saying goodbye till the next adventure in the spooky sky. Grab your snacks, the gang's on the roll. With Scooby-Doo, we're on patrol.